Hello and welcome to Cosmological Arguments. I'm your host, John Bannan. What's the deal with Debunking Atheists, Volume 2? In this video, I'm going to present one atheistic argument and tell you what's wrong with it. This argument uses the Big Bang as an attempt to prove that God doesn't exist. So, in Big Bang cosmology, physicists look back in time towards the first appearance of the expanded singularity in terms of fractions of a second when they discuss different epochs of the Big Bang itself. So you can think of the first moment of the expanded singularity in Big Bang cosmology as time equals zero. And then you have a timeline. And these lines represent duration of time after the first appearance of the expanded singularity. So this might be 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and so on. So this particular argument says that, well, between 0 and the first second after the Big Bang, there has to be a halfway point. So half a second before the Big Bang. And between the first appearance of the singularity and the half second, there also has to be a midway point. And that would be a quarter of a second before the Big Bang. And you can keep doing this, getting closer and closer and closer to the first appearance of the expanded singularity, but you can do it infinitely. So you go from a quarter, now you go to an eighth, a 16th, and you just keep doing that. And get closer and closer and closer to point zero, time equals zero, but never actually reach time equals zero. So the argument is that because you can never actually reach it, then there wasn't a time where the expanded singularity didn't exist. There wasn't a time when it first appeared, because you got to go through an infinite number of fractions of a second prior to its existence that is unending, and therefore it will always exist. The universe will always exist. And if the universe always existed, then it doesn't need a cause to exist, like God. So what's wrong with this argument? Well, this argument uses a mathematical concept called the infinitesimal. And what an infinitesimal is, it's the smallest unit conceivable in a length, which doesn't actually have a finite size. It's essentially getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, infinitely small. That's what an infinitesimal means. But that's a mathematical idea or a concept. And physical reality doesn't always match up with mathematics. Sometimes mathematics accurately represents physical reality, what physical reality actually is, and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it can simply be used as a model for physical reality, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what physical reality actually does. So, for instance, in physics theories like general relativity, it uses mathematics to make predictions and to solve equations, because what else would it use? It has to use mathematics. And mathematics has this concept of the infinitesimal in it. But that doesn't mean physical reality actually has infinitesimals in it. In fact, there is no scientific proof whatsoever that an actual infinite exists in physical reality. No one's ever proven that that's true. There's no proof that the universe is infinite. There's no proof that time recedes back infinitely. There's no proof that things can be subdivided into smaller and smaller pieces infinitely. There's no proof of an actual infinite in physical reality at all. Infinities are just mathematical concepts that can be useful in science, but that doesn't mean that they represent physical reality. And the more likely explanation is that reality comes in discrete units or packets called quanta. And that means that there's actually a finite number of units between the Big Bang and, let's say, 1 second. And because it's a finite quanta, you can get through it. You don't have the problem of an unending number of units to get through. You have a finite number, which you can get through. You go from one finite number to the next, and by the end of the time, you've reached your goal. So that's the number one problem with this argument. It relies on a mathematical concept, which has never been proven to be real in reality. Sure, physicists use the idea, the concept of the infinitesimal in general relativity, but no one's ever proven it corresponds with something in physical reality, an actual infinitesimal. In fact, science physicists presume just the opposite, that there are such things as quanta, discrete units, smallest indivisible unit of reality or matter. Another problem with this argument is, it's making the claim that you can't get from the first second back in time to time zero with the first appearance of the singularity. But it doesn't make the same argument about going from second two to second one, which is the same exact problem. So, you can divide the time between one and two the same way. Half, a quarter, an eighth, and infinitely. So mathematically speaking, there's no difference between 2 to 1 and 1 to 0. But here he's claiming you can't get from 1 to 0, but he's not saying you can't get from two to 1 or from 3 to 2. Well, this whole argument is internally inconsistent. So clearly, if you can get from 2 to 1, you can get from 1 to 0, or the first appearance of the expanded singularity, which requires a cause, which we call God. Another problem with this whole idea is the expanded singularity in Big Bang cosmology is an almost infinitely tiny, almost point of all physical reality. And when you look back in time, these scientists, the physicists tell us that the universe is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until it reaches this almost infinitely dense, uh, almost impossible speck of reality. Now, you're telling me that going back in time and seeing this thing getting smaller, 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 and smaller, smaller, that the natural inference and conclusion is that there must have been a point when this thing wasn't there and that it had to have appeared? Well, of course, that's the case. So, I mean, any reasonable person would see that's where you're going. I mean, there's going to be a point where this speck actually pops into existence, and that requires a cause. So the idea that going backward in time, the speck is just getting tinier and tinier and tinier and tinier, and that's all it ever does, and it never actually appears, is absurd. That's an absurd idea. The inference, obviously, is that at T0 that this speck first appeared, this expanded singularity first came into existence, and that would require a metaphysical cause, which we call God. All right. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Please press the subscribe button. I would appreciate it. And I hope you learned something. Take care.